Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in to this live webinar with Union Minister Hardeep Puri. The Honorable Minister has the portfolio of civil aviation, housing and poverty alleviation, as well as the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. Needs no introduction, is a career diplomat, has some very important portfolios under his belt. He is the minister who was put in charge of carrying out one of the largest evacuations on this planet. I'm, of course, talking about the evacuation of stranded Indians overseas. What we've achieved is perhaps just a drop in the ocean. There are many more that are stranded, looking for a way back to India to reunite with their loved ones. Similarly, there are many NRIs that need to leave India, go back to the countries they have been living in. We will be asking about the resumption of international flights. We will also be asking when domestic flights will resume. If trains have started, albeit in a limited manner, when will airlines start? What are the challenges that are being faced? You will need proper hygiene as well as safety. It would be so unfortunate if all of you have been free of COVID only to catch it in an aircraft or in the airport. So what kind of safety measures are we going to see when it comes to safety and hygiene? I want to know, for example, has any airline submitted a plan, a new design plan, which will implement social distancing? It has, I think, been established now globally that just getting rid of the middle seat is not going to be enough. I know many of you are tuning in here with a lot of angst. A lot of your money is being held up, whether it's by the airlines who's saying that they've refunded travel agents saying, no, we've not got the money back. End result is a consumer who has bought an airline ticket has not got the money back. And airlines are saying, we will give you a coupon for, let's say, about a year's time, pay it forward, and it'll be valid for 1 year's time. A lot of you will therefore be having fears. So let's say you booked a ticket, and I'm being hypothetical here, to Los Angeles, and let's say it was a business class ticket, and it's getting extended by a year. What happens when you want to actually use that coupon, but the airline says, you know what, now there's a price surge and you've got to give me a lot more money? It can happen with Los Angeles. It can happen with Thailand. It could even happen if you want to go with your family to Goa. All of you that have been seeking refunds. There's already a case which is in the Supreme Court, which is looking at this entire matter, which could result in nearly refunds of $500 million that would have to be made. That's as far as the aviation sector goes. Will we also be seeing capping of airfares? For example, there's an aircraft 1937 rule, which in case of an emergency does give the government a legal right to have capping of airfares. Is that something that could come about? We've been hearing about how most states don't want any aircraft to land if it's taking off from Mumbai, if it's taking off from Pune, because Maharashtra has the highest cases of COVID-19. But will airlines want to be back in the skies if you're going to have a lucrative sector like Mumbai and Pune out of the mix? We're being told that Tamil Nadu is not keen either. So with Chennai also out of the mix, will the airlines still want to be in the skies? What about quarantining? Will everyone have to be quarantined mandatorily, all passengers, whether they're coming from another state, a city within the same state, overseas? Is there going to be mandatory quarantining for 14 days? Will this government experiment with self-quarantining? How is that really going to take place? In the aircraft, you've got recycling of air because of the AC. How is that going to happen? What about your luggage? When are you going to be allowed to take luggage on the aircraft? These are just some of the questions that I am going to be posing to the Aviation Minister today. And of course, the entire health of the sector. We're just about recovering from the grounding of Jet Airways. Can India afford the grounding of yet one more airline? Having said that, we will also touch upon real estate. Boy, isn't that a multiplier? With the economy in tatters, I think a lot of people will not be looking to make any decisions when it comes to real estate. How is the minister grappling with that? What is the Narendra Modi government's plans when it comes to reviving real estate? You need to have construction activity. The 20 lakh crore rupee economic stimulus package was called the New Deal. The New Deal, which you heard about after the 1929 economic depression in the United States. After the World War, you have seen how you see higher expenditure by the government just to have a pickup in economic activity. So far, we've not seen those decisions or those announcements as yet from the various ministries. Is that going to be in the offing? And if that is indeed going to be in the offing, where are they going to find the labor? Let's get real. We've seen those images of labor trying to go back home. Will they come back in the cities to work? You've got the onset of the monsoon looming large. This is typically the time when labor likes to be in the villages, likes to be home. When we talk about monsoon, you've lost more than 2 months of economic activity. What is going to be the plan on that front? Will Mr. Hardeep Puri be making a case Minister and the Prime Minister for more economic stimulus when it comes to the aviation sector and the real estate sector? Then I will come to his third portfolio. Like I told you, he's a Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. He is a career diplomat. His wife is a career diplomat. They understand diplomacy better than anybody else. What are their plans? How will they make sure that if you do see manufacturing bases shifting from China, they should come to India? And if they come to India, they may just face higher taxation in their home domicile. Donald Trump, in an interview to Fox Business, has already talked about how you might see Apple shifting manufacturing of iPhones to India, and it's not acceptable, and there will be higher taxes. So what is the Indian government going to do to make sure that even if Donald Trump is saying that, you still get manufacturing activities in India? We've seen some states taking a lot of action when it comes to labor, but we will be asking Mr. Hardeep Puri about that. We almost have 400 attendees live with us. We will very shortly be getting the minister, the Union Minister for Civil Aviation and Housing with us. He's also, of course, the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. I'm going to mute myself for now. I've just given a monologue. Let me catch a breath of air, drink some water. We still have some time left. The minister will be with us very soon. Keep the comments coming. Keep the Q&A coming. I also just want to let you know that if you have friends, family, colleagues, even arch rivals in your industry, in your sector that have registered to be a part of this Zoom call and have difficulties in facing them, send them a WhatsApp, send them a message, send them an email, send them whatever you want. Let them know. We will also be live streaming on Facebook as well as Twitter. We've had an overwhelming response, and we want to make sure that Mr. Hardeep Puri's voice is heard by everybody. It's very clear that his sector is labor intensive, crucial to the economy, has a massive consumer interface as well. We'll be back in 2 minutes. So if you just saw me on my cell phone, I was getting in touch with the office of the Honorable Minister, Mr. Hardeep Puri. He will be live with us in about 3 to 4 minutes. I can see a lot of comments that are coming in. And I think everybody wants to know what all sectors. So let me just reiterate, if you've joined in late, I just did one monologue, but for all of you that are coming in later, I will be touching on all the 3 sectors that Mr. Puri is in charge of. Civil aviation, real estate, as well as commerce and industry, which will cover FDI as well. The civil aviation, I think a lot of the consumers are tuning in, just looking for clarity when they can fly to their loved ones, when they can get their loved ones on a plane, if they have been separated during the lockdown, if they've been separated during COVID-19. And by that, I also mean resumption of domestic and international flights. So far, we have seen the Honorable Minister being in charge of one of the largest evacuations on the planet. I'm talking about Vande Bharat, which in the first phase talked about bringing back 15,000 stranded Indians. The government itself has admitted that at that time, 2 lakh Indians had applied for the program. So let's get an update on it. What we'd also seen was in the first case, an empty plane going to Singapore, just one passenger. But the government has learnt about that, and now it is sending back NRIs as well. A lot of people want to know what happens if they're OCI. When can they come back to India? We'll ask the minister that for you. We'll also ask the minister all the questions that I can see coming in. And there he is with us. Good evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Nayantara. How are you?
I'm very good. Good to see you safe and healthy, sir. We already have 695 attendees live with us on Zoom. We've had an overwhelming response on social media when we informed that you would be joining us for this live webinar. That number has now jumped to more than 720. I just want to let you also know and let your social media team know, Mr. Puri, that if somebody doesn't make it to this live webinar on Zoom, we have decided to have an aberration and live stream this interview also on Twitter as well as Facebook. So Mr. Puri, good to see you. You're of course the Union Minister for Civil Aviation, Housing, Poverty Alleviation, and the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry. Sir, you're also a career diplomat. I am going to be posing questions to you on all these sectors, but I'm going to begin with civil aviation, which has a massive consumer interface. We got more than 400 questions on Twitter just today. A lot of them had to do with aviation. Sir, we have started seeing the railways coming back, albeit in a limited manner. The question I want to first ask you is, when will we see the resumption of domestic flights, sir? When is that going to begin? I'll talk about international flights later and the massive evacuation you've carried out with Vande Bharat, perhaps the largest on this planet. But let's talk about domestic flights, sir. When will we see the resumption, and will it be staggered?
Nayantara, let me first say that I'm very happy to be participating and interacting with your guests on this webinar. You mentioned 695 attendees. Well, I think that's a testament to your popularity.
No, by the way, it's 805 now.
I beg your pardon?
It's now 809, by the way.
Okay, 809. So I think that's eloquent testimony to your popularity, and I'm happy to be interacting with your invitees, the attendees in this. I am not surprised that the number of questions that you've received on the resumption of domestic civil aviation is large. I'm not surprised. Let me share what should be a secret, but it isn't. The maximum amount of trolling that I'm subjected to on social media is on the issue of resumption of domestic civil aviation. And I say this with a degree of seriousness. At a personal level, I completely empathize with all those who contact me, contact the other agencies of the government and ask question, when are you going to resume civil aviation domestically? I'm personally aware of the hardships that people have been subjected to. I can understand that there is a tremendous desire for them to be reunited with their loved ones. But I want to provide a perspective. And before I give you a little bit of background and perspective, let me say on the record, and you are the first news platform that I'm saying this to, as far as the Ministry of Civil Aviation is concerned, and as far as all the stakeholders in the civil aviation ecosystem are concerned, which means the Ministry of Civil Aviation, the Airports Authority of India, the airports in different cities, the air carriers, we have been ready to resume domestic civil aviation now for the last 1 week or so. So we are absolutely ready, and we could start domestic civil aviation at any time with a little bit of notice. Obviously, if you get the green signal today, it will take 2 or 3 days for the airlines to open bookings, for us to be able to calibrate the number of flights we can start with. But why have we not started? I want to draw your attention to some basic positions which I have outlined in the last few weeks. I said that civil aviation, or for that matter, urban mobility, cannot be divorced from the ground reality. COVID, as we're aware, as a virus, came in from the outside world. It's not an Indian grown virus. It came in because Prime Minister was extremely far-sighted, because we were able to see the shape of things very early in the day. We were one of the first countries in the world which stopped flights from China. I'm aware of this. I had handled that decision. We were also one of the first countries in the world which started screening incoming passengers from some countries which were widely regarded as the hotspots of the virus. I can recall you countries like Italy, countries like Iran, even South Korea at one point of time, China definitely. We were one of the first to stop flights from China. I recall being complimented by a senior colleague, a former prime minister of another country with whom I had worked. He said, well, that was a very timely step. I sent him a message back saying, well, the prime minister was able to take this decision because we saw the shape of things to come. Nayantara, because the prime minister took early action and we were able to screen, we screened about 15 lakh incoming passengers. We were able to make quarantine arrangements because we were able to take those early measures, and because the Prime Minister ordered a lockdown early, that is on 23rd March, we were spared the kind of devastation which other countries have been subjected to. We have a population of 1.35 billion. If you look at the total number of cases, they're on this side of 3,000. Now, yes, you got 100,000 or so affection, but the doubling rate, my friend Shamika Ravi tells me, is about 23 days. So in terms of absolute numbers, we have been able to contain the spread of the virus largely on account of the timely action. And now, let me recall a few statements which some of my friends on social media would troll me, choose deliberately to forget. The decision to open up civil aviation for domestic traffic is not a decision which the Ministry of Civil Aviation can take. It is not even a decision which the central government alone wants to take. It is a decision which, in the spirit of cooperative federalism, has to come in consultation with state government. And many state governments, when we started, I said on record, civil aviation is umbilically tried railways. You know, if you don't allow railway traffic, you can't allow civil aviation. Similarly, when you allow civil aviation, you have to open railways first, because the numbers are that much more. Let me give you an example. I am Minister for Civil Aviation. I'm also Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs. How much do you think is the ridership of Delhi Metro in a day? 6.5 million, 65 lakhs. What is the overall passenger traffic Delhi Airport carries out in a year? 70 million in a year. Delhi Airport, Indira Gandhi International Airport. But Delhi Metro alone is 6.5 million. So in a day, so you know, the 10 days traffic on, or 12 days or 13 days traffic on Delhi Metro total would be a year travel on traffic on airport.
If you would allow me to interject there, sir. If you have been ready, and you're saying you're giving this breaking news headline to us for the first time on this platform. Incidentally, by the way, we have more than 1,000 attendees. That's the maximum. So we are also live streaming on Facebook and Twitter. So Mr. Puri, if you have been ready, and I can now understand what you're saying, that it is the onus is also on the states. Are you waiting for a situation where all states are going to be
not at all, not at all, not at all. If you had not interjected me, young lady, I would have explained to you. So we have to assume responsibility. Because the Prime Minister and the central government took the decision on the lockdown early, we were able to spare ourselves the devastation that others were subjected. Our fatality rate, you don't have to look at the total number. The fatality rate is 3%. It is only twice what it is on normal influenza. But there is a scare. We have been able to contain the spread, and we have to control the fatality rate. Even out of the number of fatalities that we've got, out of 3%, 85% cases are those who either had pre-existing conditions or comorbidity, etc., medical condition. Now, you have managed to succeed to some extent to contain the virus in terms of the spread, and therefore your obligation, and it's a continuing obligation to save lives, has been met, and you need to maintain. But you equally have an obligation to restore livelihood, because if people don't have economic livelihood, then there's going to be collateral damage. So now we are at the stage where we have started the trains, initially Shramik train, then some Rajdhani expresses, more trains will go. Then the plight of our countrymen who find themselves stranded within the country, migrant labor, we are dealing with that. We've also had to simultaneously deal with the citizens of India, our brothers and sisters who are in distress and stranded abroad. You're absolutely right. In the first week, the first phase, which was supposed to be between the 6th and the 13th of May, we were supposed to bring back about 12,800 people from 12 countries in 64 flights. We've done that. We've seamlessly gone into the second phase. The second phase essentially implies doing that number. And even today, whilst we are dealing with a plan to repatriate 30,000 people, Ministry of External Affairs officers were meeting with my colleagues in civil aviation today, and they're trying to increase the number of flights. But again, the increase in number of flights, Nayantara, depends entirely on the receiving states being willing to take the people. Now, till we had the easing of lockdown as part of lockdown 4, I mean, my airport is ready. My airport has been ready for a week. I can take. State government must also have arrangements, logistical arrangements at the other end. People coming in from abroad are required to follow mandatory 14 days quarantine. And those arrangements have to be. So our ability to carry is only one aspect. The ability of our embassies, missions and posts abroad to identify the people who will come to India is one aspect. Our ability to provide air transport is another. But the equally important thing is that the receiving state for the state government. And we have been receiving cooperation. I have deliberately, therefore, in the last week or 10 days, I said we are hoping to do it early. Today, I have gone a step further. I'm telling you, you're the first news channel I'm telling that we have been ready now for 1 week. Now, if you read my statements, the tweets I put out, they've been clear. I said you cannot divorce it from the railway. Railways have said we are next. But urban transportation in a full way will take time. It'll take time. You're opening buses a little, some place 20% of capacity, place 50% of capacity. Metro will take a little time. But I think we're ready with all this. Insofar as civil aviation is concerned, I think in the coming few days, you have a decision. That decision is anchored in a spirit of very active cooperation between the state government and the central government. I am not saying that we necessarily need to be guided totally by the state government. No, some state government will turn around and say, we are going into permanent lockdown. That doesn't mean the center can agree to it. One of the beauties about the Indian democracy is whether you are born in Amritsar or in Pune or in Patna or in Visakhapatnam, you can go and live where you like. And I think the right to travel is part of that larger freedom. And therefore, if people, members of family, they need to be. Plus, I'm having another difficulty, I can tell you. I have flights going from Delhi to New York or Mumbai to Vancouver, but there are people on the outgoing flights who are Indians ordinarily resident abroad who cannot travel from Chennai to Delhi. So we need to work this out, and I think it's receiving very high priority attention. It would help instead of people trolling people, heartless minister, not that it makes a difference, but it's, in the spirit in which we are trying to work. Everything you do in COVID has a downside to it. And I'll be happy to answer other questions. If you want to set a train for migrant labor and there's a backlash from the state, you have to cancel the trains. Then you have to again restart. So it is a question of, in some respects, using your better judgment, basing it on assessments which are grounded in reality. Some states which were absolutely green have the potential because there's a risk in everything. You travel by bus or train, by air, there will be some inherent risk. But it's something on which to make a judgment and you allow economic activity to resume.
So if your airports are ready, you're saying your airports are ready, what you're facing trouble also is, sorting out and ironing difference with certain states that are not on board. Do you think in lockdown 4.0 itself, which is all the way till 31st of May, before that, you could see resumption of domestic flights? Because, it's a developing situation every day. Is that at all possible, or that's completely ruled out? I'm also asking this on behalf of all the families that are separated from one another, just looking for some clarity.
Look, let me, I'm not sure I may have, it was not entirely audible, but I think your question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, whether we need to wait till lockdown 4 is over. That is, you need to wait till 30th May to start, or you could do it earlier.
Yeah.
My answer all along has been, you can do it earlier. It has nothing to do with lockdown 4. Lockdown 4 is an overall prescription for lockdown 4. As I said, I was ready 1 week ago. I could have started the civil aviation flight, but some of our state governments told us very emphatically, please do not. We are still adjusting to the new challenges which have been posed by the migrant labor and others coming in. So if you start air travel immediately, our ability to handle the incoming rush of our citizens, our passengers, will be undermined. So it's in that spirit that we slowed down a little. But I think in the coming few days, we will have a decision. And I don't think you need to wait. Certainly beyond that, you could have it earlier.
So we could have a decision before that. So I also want to ask you now, when we talk about COVID-19, there's such a fear about when it comes to senior citizens and pregnant women. Is it a given that these two categories will not be allowed on planes?
What are you suggesting? That since I'm a senior citizen, as Minister of Civil Aviation, I should not be allowed to travel by air? Are you being mischievous? Or that your father and I both should not be allowed to travel?
Your own Home Ministry circulars have always distinguished senior citizens.
Okay. Let me correct that perspective. Young lady, that is an advisory. An advisory means that if you're a senior citizen or you have these pre-existing conditions, if you are obese, you are diabetic, or you are suffering from hypertension or asthma, you are advised to stay home. But I don't think any agency of the government, certainly not the Ministry of Civil Aviation, is in a position that it can prescribe or direct people not to do that. It's your fundamental right, getting up in the morning, but whatever you do, keep social distance, keep a mask on. I wear a mask 24 hours a day, not 24, the hours I'm awake. I'm only not wearing one because as it is, this, what is it called, webinaring, this Zoom, etc., is not as clear as when you are. So I did a press conference today with a mask. No, it's just an advisory. We advise people in their own interest, but they are the masters of their decision. So are the people who are careless. I mean, I don't approve of that kind of discourse behavior. But, what can you do? After a while, all this reform, all this advice is anchored in good behavior and behavior change. But let me tell you, as a small instrument of the government, I'm delighted to see that getting cooperation from all our citizens, whether it's the airports, the airlines, the other agencies, everybody's working. I mean, even when we were not all going to the office together, the kind of decision we were getting on WhatsApp or we were getting on, through video conferences, work is going on at a very fast pace. So people are adjusting to this new life, this new norm, if I may call it, which is a result of COVID.
Yes, and of course, it's a black swan event. Nobody knows. We're still learning so much when it comes to COVID-19. So, Mr. Puri, when you tell me that your airports have been ready for 1 week's time, can you give us an idea of what you mean by that? How will social distancing be followed? How will it be sanitized? How is it going to be safe and COVID-free? Can you give us an idea about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. But first of all, Naseem, the author of Black Swan, is a friend of mine. And I've been in conversation with him. I'm not sure that he even calls it a black swan event. In fact, he calls it, I think, a white swan event. Yeah. It should have been entirely predictable that some pandemic of this type will come. In fact, I think it was in 2010. I don't know whether it was, I think, when anti-fragile was being published or when he published an essay after anti-fragile. He clearly predicted it. I just reread him. I was speaking to him there. He clearly predicted it. that when you've got this kind of devastation taking place to, the overall ecosystem, climate change, so on and so forth, when you're not able to what's happening in the animal kingdom, the wet markets, etc. You should have expected one. And be careful, he says. This is what Naseem said. Be careful. It could come back even larger and more vicious form. That is one. Look, where are we going from here? Whether we should have been able to predict it or not. Look, we've had devastation which has been worse. You've had the Spanish flu. First of all, you had the First World War. Millions of people died. You had the Spanish flu, 18, 20 million people died, including large numbers in India. Look here, the mortality rate is very low. But because of the contagion thrust of this pandemic, we have allowed ourselves to be trapped in a, I would say in Hindi hawa, or in an overall system where people are paranoid. Look, I come back, total number is less than 3,000. Normally in 8,500 people die in road accidents. It's not a catastrophe in those things, but we must get used to the idea of living with the virus. That is what is requiring an adjustment. And I think different states are adjusting to it in a different way. I am also sympathetic to some of what the states say, that we may be green today, but when other people come in from other states, that green could easily turn into an orange. And that orange could also, if God forbid, it hasn't happened yet, if we go from stage 2 to stage 3, when it becomes a community infection rate. So this is what needs to hold back. That's why the decisions have to be carefully deliberated, carefully considered, and that's how we are doing it.
No, sir, but I take your point. Like, look at Goa. It had become a green zone, and now it suddenly got 16 cases, and they are saying it's because of an incoming train. But Mr. Puri, what we've also realized now with time is that thermal screening doesn't work. The temperature that you take, you can be asymptomatic. So therefore, how will you allow people into airports being convinced that they don't have COVID? How will you follow sanitization norms? How will social distancing happen in airports? I was asking you, when you say your airports are ready, can you give us an idea, beginning with first, like, how will you allow entry?
First of all, I think your question is on SOPs, standard operating procedures, which will be followed. We have to still declare those, but I can tell you, we put across a draft the other day of SOPs to the airlines, airports, and we wanted everybody's reaction to that. Some of your very aggressive and active collaborators in your profession were carrying these as the government's, guideline. So some of your friends, not you, some of your friends were sending me nasty messages. Why is this? You have kept it away from us. Such and such channel is running it. So I said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to issue a denial every time somebody runs with a bit of, I wouldn't call it fake news. It was a draft on which we were seeking people's views. And some channels, without being finalized, decided to run. Well, one thing is very clear. I cannot announce the SOPs because the SOPs are formally announced, but I can give you a peep into the kind of new SOPs you'll have. First of all, fundamental rule of the new SOPs would be that you will have to avoid all situations which involve crowding at airports. We were able to screen 15 lakh passengers coming in, but one day the situation in Delhi airport became slightly unmanageable. Why? Because earlier what we were doing is we were screening people before they embarked into an aircraft. We were doing thermal screening when they came in, and after they were thermal screened, then the concerned state government authorities would decide whether they needed to have secondary screening or whether they could be stand for home quarantine, etc. But at one stage when the numbers were going up, the state government authorities decided to change all that. So what did they do? They introduced a level of secondary screening. The minute secondary screening land and number of aircraft are coming in, you had large queues. The same people who were clamoring for logon ko le aao, how can we leave people stranded? Suddenly, they became great champions of, your government doesn't get this right. And I tell you one or two amusing situations. One journalist, she shall remain nameless, she tweeted that she came through Delhi airport and she was not subjected to screening. Now, in my line of business, this is serious. Because if we have a system of screening at the airport and somebody who's a responsible journalist says she was not screened, for me, it means there is a systemic failure. And that could be large scale. Yeah. So I called the chairman of the airport authority. I called the DGCA. I said, this is the passenger's name. This is the passenger's photograph. Now, people don't realize we've got CCTV cameras everywhere. It has Nayantara 15 hours, but we located the leak. We were able to see screenshots of her coming through a thermal screening device. We showed her the photographs. We tweeted them. And then she sheepishly came back and said, oh, I did not realize. Well, if you didn't realize, don't make a public statement to the effect that you were not screened. And then she said, but no doctor spoke to me. But that's the idea. That was a system in place that if you are okay on thermal screening, a doctor should not. If you are not passing the thermal screening or the thermal screening said your temperature is way beyond.
It's not good enough, right? That's what we've learned with time, and you can be asymptomatic for many, many, many days.
No, I'm coming to that. You see, this is where the problem is. So you have situated very often a passenger is screened at the point of embarkation, a passenger is screened at the point of disembarkation. But because of what you describe as asymptomatic, that you could be carrying the virus and not showing any symptom, that is why all incoming passengers are required to undergo a mandatory 14 days quarantine. And it has worked. It has worked. Now, what happened in the 15,000-20,000 people we brought from other countries in the recent thing? Yes, there have been a few cases. One day I turned around and said there are only 2 cases. Well, I had to eat my words because in the next lot I saw there were a few more. But that's a risk you take. If these people coming in are under mandatory quarantine for 14 days, we will be able to manage the situation. Now, coming to domestic passenger, clearly no crowds at airport. We are very serious about the idea because the queuing takes place. Why? The queuing takes place because you take your, your ticket, e-ticket, and show it to the person issues you a boarding pass. We are now in favor of boarding passes being, this is not the final word, this is our current thinking. You can have your boarding pass printed at home, then you can come, if travel a little light, not with lots of baggage because there are issues involved, and if possible, even have the baggage tag printed at home or elsewhere. So of course, some bright youngsters, not like you, but slightly younger, and they say, look at this smart aleck minister, has a printer at home. These are issues we have to resolve, but they are not going to be resolved over tweets on social media. They have to be resolved through serious discussion. So what we are doing is, airports, other places, we will make sure in cheezon ki vyavastha hogi wahan pe, so that there are no crowds there. But most important at all, there will be other decisions. Do you keep the central seat in an aircraft vacant? Now, you can't have it both ways. As it is, the airlines operate on very thin margin. And nowhere in the world, insofar as civil aviation is concerned, has keeping the middle seat vacant been. So, because even if you keep the middle seat vacant, madam, the distance between you and me in economic class is not conforming to the social distance requirement. So, the other thing is there's been a loose talk, including by medical personnel, that aircraft is not safe because you're in a closed place. This is not correct. The airline manufacturers, other people who know the airline business, actually it's a very safe mode of transport. Let me explain why. You have the nozzle for ventilation up there, air stream comes down, and if you're wearing a mask, etc., it goes through the ground, it gets filtered and gets recirculated. In other words, if you are asymptomatic and you're carrying the virus, well, that's something you cannot through thermal screening check. Wherever when you're coming from abroad, you do the mandatory quarantine for 14 days. But if you're a domestic passenger, you're going about your life in the normal course, well, you're shipping from place A to place B. And therefore, you have to base it on these kind of considerations. The aircraft will be disinfected as they are being disinfected. The care providers, the air crew are fully in protective gear. They're coming in touch with a large number of people. Maybe on these flights, we will not be able to serve full meals, etc., because, catering, food, all kinds of other issues. But these are small, this is a small price we'll have to pay till the situation resumes normalcy. And these kind of SOPs will be put out very soon, very soon.
What is very soon? I can't tell you how many messages in Q&A I'm getting. I'm also getting trolled for not being hard on you and asking you to give a date. I know you won't give me a date. The other one that I'm going on, getting is when.
Let's do a little bit of mischief. Let's do a little bit of mischief. You tell them, all these people who are sending you messages, that you've known me for many years, nearly as long as you have, I mean, I don't like to be patronizing since you were a young girl. I don't like to talk like that, but tell them, instead of trolling me and thinking that I'm a heartless minister, start sending those messages to the authorities of the state government, because they can't have it both ways. They keep saying, oh, we want our citizens to come back, but at the same time they tell us, take it easy, abhi nahi. I understand their compulsion. I mean, that's what life is all about. It's not about easy choices, but at the same time, my heart aches when I get messages from young people, old people, say they came for 3 days, 4 days prior to the lockdown, and they've been stuck since 23rd March. My only advice to your friends who are sending messages, there's no point being hard on me. I'm willing to be hard on myself. As I said, to start with, we've been ready for a week. I'm hoping that we'll take the decision soon and announce a date. But till then, just be patient. But more important, please be safe wherever you are. Don't expose yourself to unnecessary risk. I have my friends calling me, what is this you put out about senior citizen? My parents are alone in Kolkata or somewhere. So I keep telling them, don't worry. The minute the flights open, I'll be the first to go and request the airline by which they travel. The senior citizens hai, inko priority de do.
Oh, so they could get priority, senior citizens. Yeah. Okay, that's another good headline to have. Mr. Puri, the other thing I want to ask you, and again, I'm taking a cue from what I'm getting, and here also, what about outbound flights? You've got Air India operating. Vande Bharat is, of course, a fantastic hit. When will private carriers come in, which could increase the frequency of outbound flights? And here, I'm sure, you'll have to work with Mr. Jaishankar as well. But how is that going? You have so many people going back to the United States. They're all very scared. Unka visa run out ho jayega. Unka kya hoga? Bachcho ko wapas jana. Like, what is...
Dekho, aisa hai. They are scared or they are not scared. Look, I have members of my family living outside. I know what the reality is. We are going through a very troubled time. A lot of people have lost their jobs. Those who have what I call certain means to sustain themselves even without jobs, they have a slightly different view. But there are genuine people who haven't been paid for 2 or 3 months. Yeah, they've been laid off in the Middle East. This evacuation program was essentially designed to bring back those people who are in distress or stranded. It was not designed for every Indian outside. I mean, there are 9 million Indians in the Gulf. Yeah. If you have to bring 1 million back, you've had it. You don't have the. So we did an initial estimate that about 1.9 lakh people would want to come back. And I was hoping that when people hear that there is a 14-day quarantine, maybe they'll have second thoughts. But because you provided quarantine arrangements which are good, I mean, that's paid quarantine, you can stay in a 3-star hotel or you can stay in a government facility, they're clean and no sanitation, not acting as a disincentive. So who are the people who are wanting to come back? The ones who are in general distress. People, students, universities closed. But more than that, there are people who are ordinarily abroad. Now all the flights to the United States, outgoing to San Francisco, to New York, to Newark, to JFK, Chicago, they are going full and coming full. But your second question is, when do we employ the private sector? When we get the private... Look, I said from day one, we are open to the idea of private sector. But private sector has limitation. Much of this repatriation is on long haul. US, Canada, and places. The private sector doesn't have those. Their carriers don't have non-stop flying or even one-stop flying. They're using different configuration of aircraft. But on the shorter routes like India to Gulf, to Singapore, yes, we consider private sector, especially now that we'll be ramping up, maybe one-stop hops to Europe. Yes, I've said all along, we are open to the idea of private sector, and as we speak, we will be talking to them, seeing what can be done. But please note, many of these routes, especially to the Gulf, these are not money-making routes. I mean, the fare, I mean, I get told again saying, "Itna bada charge, bhai, 13,000 rupees to the Gulf." The plane is going empty from here to the Gulf because those 6 countries in the Gulf, they are not allowing Indian nationals to go there. They are only wanting to send the Indians back because, so the plane is going empty on one side and then we are charging 13,000 with a very reasonable fare to bring them back. So the private sector will also have to view, because I cannot allow the fares to go up because many of these people are economically not in a position to pay a higher fare. You see, if you allow the market forces to operate and you have this, and you've got, say, 100,000 people coming back, but you have a capacity only for 20,000, you can start charging astronomical fare if it's a market. But it's not that. It's a designated fare, 13,000 rupees for somebody from the Gulf. It's about, I think, 50,000 from Europe and 1 lakh from the United States. These are normal off-season fares. Considering in many cases the aircraft is going empty.
With a 1 lakh airfare, surely the private sector would be interested in that, especially when these flights are going full.
Madam, they cannot do the 1 lakh. They don't have the wide body planes. The wide body planes are only with Air India. Who are the private sector operators? The private sector operators are SpiceJet, Indigo, Air Asia, Vistara. Vistara has now started getting some 787, the Dreamliner. But all the others are the small aircraft. The small aircraft can only operate on these sectors. And these sectors, one way is nearly empty unless you take mangoes and fruits and vegetables along. And that's what we are doing in order to make sure that there are no, you're not running in the red. Philippines, which we were running flights, we couldn't take passengers from here. 6 countries in the Gulf region, we couldn't take.
Your first one to Singapore, I think, only had 1 passenger.
Yeah, we had 1 passenger.
But what I also wanted to ask you was that at a time like this, I get all the losses that Air India is making, how it has been absolutely unviable. I will also play a little nepotism here and ask the question that my father has asked over here. He has threatened I won't get food for dinner otherwise, which is that why don't you fix Air India? Because at a time like this, what you have seen is if you didn't have a national carrier, what would have happened to India? The medical kits that have come in, the PPE suits that have come in, how you've used it for evacuations. The question I want to ask you is that are you still going to sell Air India or are you going to fix it?
You ask your dear father, who's a close friend of mine, if he can arrange my 70,000 crore debt Air India has, if you can find some way of producing a magic wand. Look, let's be clear. I'm an admirer of Air India. Every opportunity that I get, I say it's a first-rate national asset. I say it to, it has 120 planes, it has excellent engine. I say all that. But at the end of the day, I'm also a realist that it requires a fusion of 500 to 600 crores every month to remain alive. That's the reality. Of course, I mean, don't quote me, and if I say it, I know I'm going to get trolled. I think. Well, there are countries which don't have national carriers. They are carrying out evacuation flights. Maybe then you go, maybe your other carriers, domestic carriers can acquire Air India or the government will have another. Look, these are not questions. I understand the spirit. At a time like this, we should applaud Air India's effort, but we should carry out reforms, both in domestic civil aviation management, salaries, etc. Because you cannot run an airline system where everybody's enjoying themselves. The aircraft manufacturers, they laugh their way to the bank, the airport. The only guys losing money are the airlines.
You have to get realistic on that front.
After COVID is over, Indian civil aviation will not only resume its growth, it will come out much stronger and we'll be a global leader.
So you think soon after COVID-19, but I don't know how long.
But first of all, I don't know when COVID-19 is going to last. Do you have a figure? I don't know. I'm told that the virus is going to be around. You may get a vaccine in a few months' time or in 9 months' time. Look, I'm not putting a time span on it. All I'm saying is India is uniquely positioned to reclaim its position in civil aviation because we have a large country, we have a large domestic traffic. We have also very large outbound traffic. Our footfall prior to COVID was 435 million a year. Now that's an asset. I mean, countries which are very small, but they make money in their airlines by carrying the passengers of other countries. That's going to change. It will have to change. I mean, if you have a direct flight between here and Vancouver, why would you go to a intermediary point to get to Vancouver?
No. But then given that point, sir, why don't you deploy more Air India aircraft for evacuation?
We are doing it, madam. We are doing it. As we speak, we are doing it. But you know, it's very easy to question a minister on the phone. But you know what the realities are? The crew has to be tested before it can get on the aircraft. After the crew carries out the flight, crew is again tested after the flight. Then the crew will be in a mandatory quarantine. So, I mean, the number of hours the crew can fly and be operationally available reduces this totally. So, there is a question of crew, there is a question of aircraft, all manner of things.
The other thing I wanted then to ask you is globally what we started seeing is a case of self-quarantining. Do you think India is ready for that, or will it have to be the state-mandated quarantine facilities or hotels? Is that the logical next step, self-quarantining at home?
I don't want to be answering that question. If you had a society which was entirely strong on self-discipline, if you had a society where if I say I'm going to quarantine myself, I'm going to quarantine myself. I mean, I know of a case where the hand was stamped home quarantine, and the next thing we heard was the Delhi government had gone and put a piece of paper stuck on that person's road. Whenever you come and say I live in A3 Defense Colony or GK1 or somewhere, they take you down, and then you say I'm on home quarantine for 14 days. They go and chapo that piece of paper there, and then the neighbors started calling us saying, "Wo to chala gaya ji wapas Singapore." So these days you can make out from their phone number there in Singapore. So I hope people have a change of heart. I hope people are disciplined. But this is not a risk you can take. Because you heard the story of the patient zero. One guy can go and infect God knows how many. So we have to be careful. We have to make sure that the system is in place. So I would say that this mandatory 14-day quarantine requirement which the states are imposing is fully understandable. And I would support it.
Before I go to housing, I just want to ask you one question. You yourself use this phrase, airlines are running on thin margins. So can India afford to have another airline get grounded? If you talk to airlines, they say that they're very scared about their future, but they're going to survive COVID-19. I think the biggest stimulus measure that has come perhaps also from the government for aviation has been the fact that it's intervened and made sure two of the largest airlines, SpiceJet and Indigo, actually reverse the salary cuts. Very good news for the employees, but not so good for their P&Ls and their balance sheet. So, sir, what is the plan to make sure the airlines stay vibrant? And is that your area of concern at all? Because that is the private sector.
I am not going to negotiate the stimulus required by the airlines through a webinar. Let me tell you very frankly, there are some airlines which have demands which are airline specific. I can't get into those, but there are certain things that the airline industry needs. In a situation in which there has been no revenue for airports, other than that little bit, Lifeline, which incidentally Lifeline Udan is done fantastic work. I mean, 890 tons of essential medical supplies and cargo, and it's really heartwarming. But when the revenue of airports is down, when the airlines have not had any revenue, when the tourist sector is completely down, so we need to look at what can be done for the ecosystem per se. So in the stimulus package which Nirmala ji outlined, there were three things for the airline aviation sector. One of them is, domestic airspace management. Important because, if you're going to spend 30% extra flying, that means 30% extra fuel, 30% more flying time, and so on. So that's a good reform. MRO, bringing the GST down, will mean our airlines will be able to get engines and repair and servicing done inside the country rather than going on. Very, very important. Similarly, the privatization of airports will again, we did 6 earlier, we awarded 3, we're going to do another 6, we get the other 3 sorted out. These are excellent things. But there are other issues. And not only as a line ministry, but these I'm pursuing on a daily basis. I can't even tell the airline. I mean, I've had meetings today to plead that, that we look at the problems which some of the airlines are facing in their loans. Maybe the banks can give them some soft loans tied over a 3-month, 6-month period, which they can repay after they've, 6 months within the activity started. So we are pleading all those things, but it's not something some journalists, including someone from your outfit, they have the habit of getting these points from the airlines, and then when you have a pliable minister like me on there, you say, why would you like to do this? I mean, that's not something I negotiate through the press. Yes, we are looking at some of these things. As a line minister, I am acutely conscious of the stress that the civil aviation sector is facing. I'm acutely conscious of the stress that the construction industry is facing. Because after agriculture, construction is the second largest employer in India. It's in the informal sector. But we've been talking to Credai, we've been talking to Naretco, we have been doing things for the construction sector prior to COVID. COVID only adds and exacerbates the existing fault line. So we are dealing with all those things, and I'm very confident. You see, I keep coming back to one thing. Let's resume activity at the earliest. Because once you resume activity, rest follows. Then you can say, all right, I've had 2 months of lost time. Now, it's easier for me to advocate remedial measures if I know what the extent of it is. But if the lockdown continues for 6 months, there may not be anything left to pick. I totally agree with you.
Send them to abject poverty, which is the big area of concern we have, and especially when we see the movement of the migrant labor. Mr. Puri, the other thing from a consumer's perspective, and this, there's been so many questions on it as well. So if I could ask you, a lot of the flights had taken bookings before the first lockdown, pre-23rd March. Now they're saying we'll pay it forward, we'll give you a voucher. That figure is being pegged at almost $500 million for domestic and international flights. So $500 million is now a case in the Supreme Court as well. Anything you want to say for those consumers and even the travel agent community out there which is stuck with this and they just don't know what to do?
Madam, this whole business of bookings is a very complicated business. It's not just the airlines. There are travel agents in between. The travel industry has standing arrangements with the airlines. Now, if you want to travel, let's say, hypothetically, in February next year, okay? You're in May. You can buy an Apex fare or over 60 days fare and you can get a very cheap ticket. Now, many people do that. I have somebody at home who wanted to go home to Bihar, so he bought a ticket. Now, in between came the lockdown. Yeah. All right. The airline said, well, we are not in a position to refund. But there was some category of people, Nayantara, who booked just before lockdown and got stranded for long-term travel. We issued an advisory saying that they should be reimbursed. Yeah. Why? Because they're directly, these are people under stress. If you're a student, you wanted to travel to, from university to home or from your home to university, and you wanted to travel 10 days later, and suddenly you got a lockdown, you're affected by that. Not a person who booked 6 months in advance. That's a very different kind of booking. So we issued an advisory. Some airlines continued because the consumer people, the consumers, they will tell us the airlines are collecting money, and the airline said, no, we can't pay you back because you don't have the money. The travel agents have it, and we've created a credit shell. So we distinguished between those bookings which were directly a result of the showdown. There was the first lockdown, then there was a second lockdown. And when we did not see the requisite compliance, we issued a directive. For instance, let me give you an example. There's an airline somewhere outside India. It's called Fly Something. And they were taking bookings on 6th April. Everyone knew that 6th April flights are not going to open. But they collected a lot of money. I had to issue a directive, and I told DGCA they should enforce the directive if necessary by taking action against the airline. So by and large, we've been able to correct that. And once the airline, business resumes, all this will be subsumed. But we had to step in as a government in order to, one airline operator told me, but this is standard practice. Standard practice can be normal time. COVID not a normal time. This is sui generis situation, extraordinary situation. And if passengers are hurt, the same passenger also is losing his business. Everybody is losing business. So we have an ecosystem which is fair, transparent, and equitable. So if anybody wants to see, so As long as it's a genuine this thing, we have no problem. We issued an advisory and a directive. But I think the problem is more or less resorted itself out. I don't want to go into greater detail for the simple reason that the matter is before the Supreme Court. Somebody has filed a petition before the Supreme Court and the Honorable Court will decide. So I don't have to take a position on that.
So anything you want to say for the OCIs? A lot of them seem to be logging in. They want to know when they're going to get permission to come back.
I started, first of all, my greetings to my friends who have this stamp called OCI. I started by saying that the evacuation flights were essentially meant for Indian citizens who found themselves stranded and in distress in foreign countries. Now, by definition, the holder of an overseas citizen of India card is not an Indian national but a foreign national because he or she holds a foreign passport. Again, let me tell all of them, I'm acutely conscious that sometimes the distinction is very thin. I have a situation, for instance, where, you know, the parents are Indian nationals, but their children, very small in age, 4 years, 6 years, they were born in the United States, they have American passport, they're an OCI. Now, we can't have a situation where the parents are allowed to come and the child gets left behind. I had a kind of an emergency case. Somebody approached us to say that somebody was coming in from London. He's an Indian national, but his wife has got an OCI card. Now, so we try to interpret this as constructively and as positively as we can by saying if you're members of the same family, then, you know, we try and do it. But the problem is, if there is demand, which is overriding, if that through 300 seats in an aircraft and then 10,000 claimants, on what basis will the guy on the ground give a preference to the OCI card holder, Indian nationals involved? And the same people will go and sue him. You understand? So it's a complicated situation. We will have to work out guidelines for this. I'm very much aware of what the problem of OCI card holders is. In many respects, you know, they have exactly the same problems that Indian nationals have in a crisis situation like this.
Then we could talk about your other portfolio, housing now.
Do you really need to?
Yes.
No, I'm okay. I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah.
You see that, sir, when you look at aviation and housing, both of them, and you look at the economic stimulus package that has come out, some more could have been done. These are very labor-intensive sectors. You're looking at a sector now when you talk about housing, the migrants, how they've been treated, how they're struggling to go back home. I don't know if they'll be in a hurry to come back to go and work at construction sites. You've got the monsoon also coming with us. So even if you come out with a fancy stimulus package, where are you going to get the labor, sir?
Well, you are being philosophical. Let me just share with you. When you say more could have been done, I mean, that's an expression I can use anywhere. If it ended up being a $3 trillion economy, I was at 16 trillion or a $20 trillion economy, my capacity to put money on the table by way of an outright grant goes up. But if you look at the steps that have been taken, look, I want to say on record, full sense of responsibility. I've written 2 articles on this also. One of them was only day before today, where I've said, if this isn't the stimulus package, what is? Look, if you are dealing with the situation, the old proverbial situation, do you want to give people fish to eat or do you want to teach them how to fish, which is more efficient? Now we've done a lot of this. First of all, when you give 1,000 crores to the district magistrate to feed the migrant labor coming back, that's clearly need to do for a short-term emergency. We've given 40,000 crores additional by way of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme or Manrega. I've written about that. Now that 40,000 crores means what? 2 members of a family, and we've raised the daily from 180 rupees to 202 rupees. If 2 members of a family start working, clearly you'll have a situation they may not be wanting to come back. So anything that you do during COVID has a downside. Now, in the initial phase, after 23rd March, the central government, the Prime Minister appealed to all employers, to all stakeholders, continue to pay the salaries of the people. So it was all right. By the time they got their salary for March on 7th April, everything was all right. But then the scare spread. Now, if migrant labor from Punjab wants to go back to Orissa, what has the central government got to do with it? Your friends in the liberal would make out as if this whole, I'm just pulling your leg.
You would have facilitated buses, trains. They're all.
No, I tell you. So yeah. So either case. If somebody from Punjab wants to go and back to Orissa or wants to go from somewhere else, the civil government can only help. So what did we say? We want to run trains. We put trains on the thing. The state government say, "Mat bhejo, abhi mat bhejo." So I think in the next 2-3 days we will get all these extra trains. We will take these people back. But you are right. Now, once economic activity commences here in full force, for that economic activity to attain the gravitas and become fully viable, depend on the labor coming back. If the labor decides to stay on till Diwali or till the Chhat Puja takes place, there's an issue. What happens if some people don't decide to come back at all? What happens if virus behaves differently? Look, these are all contingencies for which you can only plan up to a point. But you're absolutely correct. I'm very clear. When you're in a crisis, my own personal approach is you have to be generous and you have to spend your way out of the crisis. And construction industry is one of the industries which invariably helps out. This was the case in China many years ago. This will be the case in India. All our big projects, they have to come back on stream quickly so that there is employment generated, labor sees an incentive to that. Some people may not want to come back, but the employer, the enlightened employer has been able to hang on to those people. The ones who are enlightened will be able to incentivize the people coming back. But look, I continue to be an optimist, and I think both civil aviation and construction industry will be back soon.
And of course, all of that is going to depend on COVID-19. Sir, before I let you go, I said you're a career diplomat. We saw Donald Trump recently give an interview to Fox Business where he said that if Apple were to move manufacturing, and he gave this example, if Apple were to move its manufacturing for iPhones to India, of course it'll have to pay higher taxes. I'm guessing a lot of countries will start doing that as they go even more inward. So you're the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry, you're a career diplomat, you get the United States, look at your career. How is the Modi government going to grapple with this? Because, as we talk about the New Deal, as we talk about 20 lakh crore rupee stimulus, we've also seen reforms for land and labor. What is your plan on that front?
Look, I am very clear. My understanding and complete faith, when the Prime Minister unveiled this package, it is not an inward-looking package. If you are more competitive, which you are bound to, through reforms which are structural on land, labor, on a lot of things, and you put this kind of stimulus in, look, this is just the beginning. This is going to be a long haul. There's more to come. It's not for me to announce it. But you will see that India will be a favored destination for people who wish to relocate. Now, unlike my other colleagues, senior colleagues in the Council of Ministers, I'm not going to say anything about where they're coming from, etc. I'm much more cautious. Look, if you are owning means of production and you are located in a place X, if for some reason that place X becomes less attractive, you have to look for more people. How many more countries do you have which can compete with India, both in terms of the size of its market and the kind of entrepreneurial talent, labor, educated people who are available? India stands out. Now, how much of it comes to India? There will be a bigger give and take. The Japanese government has put aside some money, about $2 billion or so, to attract people to move and relocate. The Asian Development Bank is doing it. I've seen shoe manufacturers who were located in a particular place wanting to relocate here. This is a process that has just begun. And you don't judge it by 3 days headlines or a fortnight's headline. I think you and I will be around for a while. We'll discuss this after a few months.
I think the biggest headline you've given me on this aspect is that we're going to see more stimulus measures. Mr. Puri, I had asked you for 1 hour time and I've got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to end it once again because I'm just amazed. I don't know how you do it on Twitter. I'm getting trolled for the last 60 minutes just saying, get a date. So anyone who's logged in late, Mr. Puri, I'll make this the final one. Resumption of domestic and international flights. People are separated from their loved ones. Anything they can take away from this webinar on that front?
Look, I think this webinar has been conducted in a spirit of total transparency and candidness.
Yeah.
I can tell you, insofar as the external sector is concerned, the number of evacuation flights will increase manifold. We will add the number. It is so people who have to go from here to wherever they are ordinarily resident, Europe or United States or Canada, they will get the opportunity. We have to increase the number of flights. And I think we are committed to doing that. Insofar as domestic traffic is concerned, I can't be more direct than that. We are ready. We are ready. Direct your attention.
And Tamil Nadu.
Do you believe? Huh?
So is it states like Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu? Because,
I'm not. Look.
Okay.
Look, I spent 40 years in another profession. I'm not naming states. I mean, why should I name any state? Because their positions are not written in stone. When I speak to their minister, I spoke to one minister who's himself tested positive on COVID in one of the states. And I told him, he said, देखो, we are very clear. अभी थोड़ा हमें कंट्रोल करने की जरूरत है क्योंकि बहुत माइग्रेंट लेबर अंदर आ रहा है और हमें उनके लिए व्यवस्था करनी है. But भाई, it's against the doctrine of common sense that you will keep civil aviation closed. You have to open it. So इसमें आप क्यों इतनी बारीकियों में पढ़ रहे हैं? वो जो आपके मैसेजेस आ रहे हैं, बोलो आज कल या परसों. अरे भाई हो जाएगा, जल्दी होगा. I think the best statement I can make is we are ready. The airports are ready. The air are ready. The minute we get a green signal, it's only a question of 3 days after that.
So why don't you at least start the connectivity between states that are willing? Why don't we?
Madam, I said, madam, it's not so simple. It's not कि we conference कर लो, 600 लोग होंगे, 700 लोग होते हैं. बड़ी इसमें और भी interstate problems होती हैं. आप ले जाओ किसी स्टेट में और वो हवाई अड्डे पे उतार दो उनको, आगे जाने की बस नहीं हो और chaos होगा. There'll be, there are issues. So we have to tie all this up.
Okay, and with that, Mr. Puri, you promised me 60 minutes, and thank you so much for your 60 minutes. Thank you for being candid, answering all of our questions. I'm sure all those who have attended are, feel better. They know a lot more than they did prior to this webinar. Honorable Minister, I'd like to thank you once again for being a part of this ET Now webinar.
Madam, thank you very much. Come on. I didn't know it was 60 minutes. I was 30 minutes, but you went on and on. But thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.